hexad types are separate specialized aspects of 3, 6, and 9.
You might explain this hexagram triangle or the hexad types as forming the contra flow types in the Enneagram.
And so you can see like the root of all problems is the hexad thing.
Right, and that's why it forms an upside down triangle going down.
The big hormone Enneagram.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres, 4-5 wing, 4-5-8 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9-1, 9-7-4 trifix.
What up, it's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing 7, sexual self-pres with 8-5-4 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4 with a 3-6-9 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
I used to do a phone voice for a couple men. I would pay for it. It's great.
You used to do a phone voice for what?
For men.
Oh, they paid to do phone voice?
They wanted to hear like my receptionist voice talk to them.
Oh, yep.
Wow, interesting.
The corporate receptionist.
Be nice to have a vagina do stuff like that.
Oh my gosh, it's so easy.
Only gay dudes
you give a fuck about men, and they're like, "Oh my god,
yeah,
she likes me. Wow, I think she really likes me.
You love me like my mother did."
There's a guy who's there's an 8 who's blowing up on social media these days, and he used to run like a cam girl. He used to run like a cam girl business, and he said that I wasn't running a cam girl business. I was running a therapy business. Like there's so many sad men out there who just want some attractive woman to remember their name.
Oh,
God.
Man.
It's like, she remembered my name. I can't get a blowjob from my wife. Like she cares about me.
Oh my god.
Wow.
It's sad.
It's 100% accurate.
I believe it though. Yeah, I totally believe it.
One of my roommates one time was a guy, and he was like, "Nancy, I'm so afraid I'm going to end up like one of the guys that pays you. What if I end up like that, sad and alone in my life?" And he was like so worried about that. It was really funny.
And that it happened.
I'm just grateful if Alexandra remembers my name.
Yeah. Just barely. She just every once in a while remembers it.
John?
Honey.
Baby cakes. Sweetums.
People liked our fucking
oh yeah. People are just coming all over themselves for that episode. It was great.
Yeah.
People are what?
People are coming all over themselves for the Wings episode.
Oh, good.
You wanted me to say it again. That's why you said what?
Yeah.
No, that's not what, that's really not what I wanted to
She
hear.
wanted you to do the voice, you know,
The
that she
voice,
pays you
yes.
for.
I pay a lot of money for that, though.
Yeah,
So,
you
yeah.
guys, the gentlemen on here, could make a lot of money doing that too.
Doing
That
what?
is true.
Get your smooth operator voice and just like read poems or something.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's a guy on
Yes.
TikTok I followed that literally just reads poems. He doesn't show his face or anything. And he has like millions of followers. Millions.
I might have a career in that, yeah. Reading disturbing poems for 9s.
I feel like everything I say is poetry anyway, so
That's right.
that's why people listen to this
perfect.
podcast.
So you have a
Just a bit
you're ahead of the crowd,
narcissistic.
then.
Absolutely.
John's actually the best at being humble.
I'm the best.
The most humble of the bunch.
Yeah.
Welcome to Big Hormone Enneagram, the most incredible podcast.
The best.
And
that
the most
exists.
humble.
We have some plugs, of course. We got Buy My Book, Please, and I'm doing a study group focusing right now on my book. Maybe it'll go into other books, but it's actually pretty good. We meet on Sunday via Zoom. I record them. I'm trying to figure out how to do it more efficiently and stuff, but it's $15 donation per class. And then both David and Emeka have been on our friend Josh Levine's new podcast, What It's Like to Be Me. That's what it's called?
What it's like to be you.
But it's like to be you.
What it's like to be me.
learn
What it's
more
like to be
about
John
Josh
Lukovich.
Levine.
What it's like to be John. And David and Emeka were both interviewing about what it's like to be John. So yeah, Josh is a great interviewer. He's a heart-streaming 3.
Mhm.
And I have not listened to y'all yet, but when he
It's amazing.
interviewed me, I was really like moved by it. So I don't know, what was y'all's experience?
It was great. It was. I remember the experience. I think I mentioned on the Tinder swindler episode, talking about 3ness and how they're able to create an emotional landscape. And I remember feeling that after that interview with Josh, because I felt like I was seeing myself through his eyes, or through his kind of ability to contextualize me. And, it's kind of like getting a hit of social in a very clear, direct way. And it felt really good. And so just like, I think we connected that to how like 3s can sweep you up in a sort of like an emotional landscape where you get to see your ideal self in a sort of way. But yeah, he's good at asking questions that pull things out that are relatable, stuff like that.
Yeah, my experience was interesting too. Just a 3 trying to peg a 9 into a certain location kind of thing, and asking about
pegging
and asking about stuff around identity and things like that are really
asking about butthole stuff.
Yeah,
I don't think he even heard what he said. Did you even hear what you said, David?
No, I missed it.
All right, well, we'll just let it.
Let
him go.
Was it something about pegging?
Yeah,
and buttholes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, David?
Sorry.
Retro laugh attack here. That's all I had. I've listened to it twice because
we can't peg him like Josh does.
Yeah, that's the thing. You guys are lacking. Anyway, it was good. I've listened to it a couple of times to try to remember myself, and it's been helpful. My existence.
Yeah, I mean, I he hasn't posted mine yet, but I got emotional actually, because it was just like, I'm a heart type being seen. So yeah, Josh is great, and I'm really looking forward to like how that's gonna develop, that podcast or series or whatever it's gonna end up being. It's like a full on podcast, right?
Yeah, it's an interview series type of podcast. Like in the OPS side of things, there's a dude who interviews people who gets typed by Dave and Shan, and he's got like, it seems like hundreds of interviews. And so when I was trying to learn OPS, it was a great resource. Like if you wanted to see a type, there was an interview that he had done with like maybe 8 different examples of that type. And so he is looking to interview more people. So if you've been typed by Enneagrammer, as in if you have a typing that's accurate that you agree with, hit up Josh, and he can do an interview on you, and it'll be great.
Yeah. And then buy David's Trifix booklet on Enneagrammer.com or Anysight.com. And like I always say, it doesn't just teach you about Trifix. It's like teaches you about stems, and I think you can like compare different stems and isolate them and get a feel for type from an aesthetic, imaginal point of view, not just a descriptive point of view. So you can get a feel for it that hits a different sensor than just cognitively. And then is there anything else?
DAA, Dark Arts Academy.
Yeah. Go for it.
We typed RuPaul recently. That was really entertaining, interesting typing. I didn't really know very much about RuPaul, but he is like a super prolific, has like a super successful show. And it's kind of, when you look at the full typing, it's like for a self-press, well, I don't want to give it too much away, but self-press blind, really getting some productive output like that's pretty impressive. And then we typed Darren Brown, which some people are pretty familiar with him, but he's that was a really interesting episode, because he's taking psychology and turning into entertainment, sort of like the ways that people are not aware that they are being manipulated and influenced by the media and politics and religion, and all these ways that psychological frameworks are being used to shift people's, shift people's mental space and all that stuff. So yeah.
And speaking of Dark Hearts. I'm seeing Alexandra and I are seeing King Woman on Friday.
Oh, nice
concert. Yeah,
Cool.
I'm excited. Fucking love her. Yeah, y'all's episode on her was great.
Yeah, she's a performer.
Yeah.
People say stuff about nines being like, wallflowers. Like, she has a big presence about her.
For sure.
On stage.
For sure. And
So it was really good.
yeah, her show's amazing. And I find her music just to be so profound. Like, again, it just goes against the trivializing stereotypes of nine out there, like her shit just, I don't know, really speaks to me. So
I also
anyway.
like that in the interviews you guys, or in the interviews you guys chose for the episode, she's kind of like just being like a secret nine of like, I don't know,
Right.
still just like hiding all her power. Like everybody thinks that everyone thought she had a 4 fix, and everyone thought she, this and that, and still in interviews when people are trying to pull out her like profound wisdom, she's like, I don't know. It's all about. It just came to me.
Yeah.
It just happened.
Yeah, for listeners on the fence about dark arts, like that's one of the great things about dark arts is that you sometimes you get typings you wouldn't expect, and then you see it.
Right.
And
Sue Johansson was another one that was really fun to watch. I finished that one like the other day, and that one was great. I imagine everybody sees her as like, an assertive type or like a 7 or something like that. So to see her real typing come out was like a cool flavor. I don't want to give it away, but it was a cool flavor of that type.
Yeah. And it sort of like shows people that we come in with our own preconceived ideas of what a type might be, but like we're discovering this stuff in real time.
Work it out.
And we just sort of work it out, and it's like, okay, that doesn't fit. And so that's part of what it keeps it interesting for us. It's not like we prepare the class and we already know. It's part of like we are doing a live typing, and people are getting to look into that process of what it takes to actually see a type crystallize and double check it and make sure it's right and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. All right, so last time we talked about wings and more in like a abstract space than going through them, but one of the things we touched on was first I think it stemmed from recognizing that the attachment types 9, 3, and 6 are all, they're the primordial triad of the Enneagram, and represents in a sense like the active, negative, and reconciling force.
Mm-hmm.
And in David's scheme, they represent 3, the individual, and then what was 6 was
it's like the divided, split mind.
Yeah, the mind kind of divided against itself, and sort of the universal problem of everyone being consumed in their mind.
And also it's sort of like the kind of parallel of individual and collective identity, right? Like, would you say?
There's that, and then there's also that 6 represents superego, right? It's that good, bad, black, white, right, wrong stuff.
Yeah, and it's to me it's like 3 is individual, and then 6 with the superego is like the individual within a system or something.
There you go. That's good.
And like, which perspective do I take in any circumstance? Am I acting as my individual self, or as my identity within a larger embedded thing? And then 9 is everything.
The universe.
The all and a nothing.
3 threes.
The beginning and the end.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to 6, you could say like 6 is caught between 9 and 3. Like 9, in some sense, represents the whole collective, and 3 represents me as an individual. So, which one do I do? Which one do I go towards?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, there's sort of the primordial trinity, but then one of the things we were talking about was the contrast between these attachment types with hexad types, and what an attachment wing does to a hexad type, or what happens when a hexad type has a hexad wing, and these kind of things. And what emerged was this idea that potentially there's a kind of an antithesis trinity or a negative trinity that is, in a sense, represented by the combination of 2 hexad types. So,
yes,
in I think I was kind of spitballing it with 1 and 2 is kind of this idealism or transcendence or divine realm.
Mm-hmm.
And then between 4 and 5, like what 4 and 5 are offshoots of, is separation or emptiness or the void or pushing away from the all in some sense. And it's the counter there to 9.
Mm-hmm.
And and the counter of that 1-2 space is
6.
the the 6 that we talked about with the superego and the divided self.
Right.
The 1 and 2 are in a sense not divided.
Right.
Even though they're also superego.
Mm-hmm.
There's this counter thing going on. And then for the assertive type 8-7 place, there's kind of that one I'm a little vaguer on, but it's sort of like a forcing agenda, right? Like like in the sense of the primordial trinity of 3, 9, and 6, there is some kind of participation. And then if this anti-trinity, so to speak, they're all sort of a separation or a breaking off, and so there's a kind of independent will or independent movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say though is anyone listening to this episode, you should pull up an Enneagram symbol.
Oh yeah.
While we're doing this, because or even just get every Enneagram symbol and draw this triangle, so you can sort of visualize that this triangle that we're talking about. When you get the point between 7 and 8, and the point between 1 and 2, and the point between 5 and 4, and draw a triangle, it's a upside down inversion of the 3-6-9 triangle. And for those people who are fans of Stranger Things, you could sort of look at this hexagram or hexad triangle as almost like upside down, an upside down of the 3-6-9 triangle.
Exactly.
And so what we're going to get into with David's stuff, he's got something called reflections, and how 3, 6, and 9 is reflected in these hexad triangles that we're talking about, and it gets really interesting. But yeah, it sort of reflects like if this triangle of the hexad types are born from the core, like the universe is driven by 3-6-9. That's the thing that everything comes from. And attachment, everyone is an attachment type, but there's this attachment to frustration, attachment to rejection, that represents this counterforce or individuated counterforce to the base attachment that the universe of the Enneagram is everything's born from that attachment, but this frustration and rejection represents this the upside down of attachment. So David, I could get into if you want to get started with your reflections.
So this idea is again called the reflections, and that comes initially from my schema that I call the sundial, which I've talked about before, which is just the idea that the line between 6 and 3 you can imagine it as the horizon line of Earth, right? And so at point 3 is on the right, and so that's the east. So point 3 is the sunrise in the east. Going counterclockwise on the symbol, 9 is then the sun at high noon, and 6 is the sun at sunset. And that puts 4 and 5 in the underworld in the dark, right? And so if there's, this sun rotation motif, then it occurred to me that there'd be reflections and of the sun. So one thing this gets at is that the hexad types are separate specialized aspects of 3, 6, and 9. And so in other words, for example, type 3 reflects, at dawn upward towards points 7 and 8. And so 7 is one portion of 3, or one particular specialized aspect of 3, and 8 is similar, right? So 7 is the hope, glory, shine, optimism side of 3. The aspect of 3 that's a planner, right? Kind of
Or
like 7.
inspirational.
Right.
Inspirational.
Right. And a goal setter, like 7 is a planner, right? The I can do it. I can do what I set my mind to. 7 is the mental center, right? And then the 8 part of 3 is the pragmatism and straightforwardness of 3, the strength and activation drive of 3. It's the 3 powering through, persevering, expressing willpower, right? So 7 and 8 are then, specific aspects of 3. And then, so looking at going to 6 and doing the reflection towards 1 and 2, 1 is the superego part of 6, the black and white, compulsion towards higher principles that benefit the collective. And then 2 is 6's deep involvement with people, right? If 2 is wanting to be loved, 6 is a have to wanting to be liked. I mean, that's one way to do it, right? And so, so you've got the superego piece and the higher collective and the people orientation of 6, and that's what makes up 6. And then another riff on that one is that in the archetypal movement from 1 into 2, that's 1 splitting into 2. And that's sort of part of what the issue is with 6, is that splitting in 50-50. So that's the archetypal jump from oneness to 2ness, and then diametric opposition inside of 6. So then going to 9, reflecting down towards 5 and 4. 5 is the part of 9 that is the self as an abstraction or a non-presence, a disconnection or a closed off quality, right? The part of 9 that's retracting away from existence or presence, amputating themselves from others, right? And then 4 is like the symbols and beauty aspect of 9, right? To the degree that, you can rightfully associate 4 with art and artists and so forth.
Or like a singular symbol that represents like a core thing, distinct me.
Right. So that gets at like kind of pinging off of John's stuff around 4 and envy. Like one way to frame up envy and the 4's ideal inner self-image is that they're holding internally as a kind of like a self symbol or a self fetish. And one way to conceive of all that is as a kind of like archetype making function or symbol making, which relates to 9's association with archetypes, such as we see with 9s like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, and all the stuff that they did around fairy tales and myths, which are highly concentrated, potent images that represent certain forces. Right. So anyway, that's the basic idea right there of the reflections.
Very cool.
Super cool.
Yeah. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And so, like I was just thinking about that upside down triangle. And, of course, we talk about hexad versus attachment, and it's cool to think about how the hexad types are born from the attachment types, because everyone's the attachment type, attaching to frustration or rejection.
Right.
But, like the analogy with the upside down, it's like it's the same world, but there is where you get the monsters and the demons and stuff. That's where all the it's a very specific, maybe to attachment, like really oppositional way of attaching to things. And so that sort of thing that we talk about, the sort of friction between hexad and attachment is, even though it's attachment to frustration or rejection, it is still very, very like oppositional to the core 369.
Yeah, so it's a paradox, and that's a big part, I think, of what's in the Enneagram. But in this particular case, around this idea, it turns out that this 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8 space is actually made from attachment, right?
Mhm.
These hyper individuated spaces in the Enneagram are components of, or made from the elements of attachment.
Disgusting.
Right. It's horrible.
So
winning.
I've been. Sorry.
I just said we're winning. We've always been winning.
They're in everything.
The dominant
We
forces.
just don't have to tell you because we know already.
The arrogance of 9.
Yeah.
Um,
Humility of 9.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking, like, if the 936 is the everything, the individual, and collective for 6, then, it's sort of like this counter triad. I would give it the terms like assertion, separation, and transcendence, which are all like going away from or somehow getting out of sync with that primordial trinity, the attachment trinity.
Okay.
And I've been reading Hegel and shit, and so I've got this kind of, I don't know, this vibe in my brain right now, but it's kind of like the negative force, or like a Lucifer principle or something like that, because it's like it's a willfulness that's out of sync with like the cosmic flow, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
And so you could see like the root of all problems is the hexad thing.
The upside
Right.
down.
And that's why it forms an upside down triangle pointing
Yeah.
down, you see,
Right.
towards Lucifer.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like
And-
saying, oh, go ahead.
Well, and last thing about it is that the crown of the primordial triad is 9, which is like the all, and then things are the offshoot of the all.
Yeah.
And then the counter, the bottom of the other triad is the 4 or 5 separation. So it's like the primal forces, the two forces are like this unity and separation.
Yes.
David, you had something about the line going vertical. That was good. From 9 to the bottom, because it's like, okay, if up there is the sunshine, and the space between 4 and 5 is the black hole of nothing.
The dark. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this on the Cosmic 3-Way pod, where I think, John, you'd said something like, if the 9 point represents seeing all, at the sun, you can see everything, but the space between 4 and 5 represents the complete negation of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is something cool about there being like this vertical line between everything, and then at the bottom, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's a way that like that vertical piece is in a way existing outside of the other sets of reflections, in the sense that, so the line between 6 and 3 is horizontal line, and to me that represents symbolically an ease of crosstalk between those two. Like there's a constant, let's say, ping back and forth between 6 and 3, and this gets reflected partly in this reflections idea in this simple mathematical way, which is so 3 is reflecting up towards 7 and 8. You add 7 and 8, that's 15, but you add that down to single digit, that's 6. So 3 equals 6. And then on the other side, 6 is reflecting up to 1 and 2. So 6 is 3. So that represents that sort of back and forth thing that's happening between 3 and 6, versus this kind of up vertical light dark thing that's happening.
And the
between
numbers
9,
don't
4, and 5.
change. Yeah, the numbers don't change.
That's
for
the
that
other thing too, is that then with 9, it's another 9 at 5 and 4. You see,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the others
Totally.
cross, they form like an X pattern.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's
awesome.
interesting. Yeah.
Tell me if I'm veering too far, but something that has always kind of intrigued me in a certain way is almost like the false point that's underneath 9. That's like the crisscross of 8 to 2 and 1 to 7.
Right.
Oh.
And
there's going to be something there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like and like in Kabbalah, which I think the Kabbalic tree of life is of the same transmission or in the same vein of the Enneagram.
Yep.
And the tree of life, for people that don't that aren't that are normal, it's a diagram of 10 spheres that represent this emanation from the unknowable source. And their spheres are called Sephiroth, something like that. And this is the heart of Jewish mysticism. And this first Sephiroth is called Keter, and it represents the transition point from the nothing to the something. And these spheres, the idea in Kabbalah is that your soul emanates from one of these spheres, and that if you know what sphere it is, you know God's plan for you. And that the tree, this constellation of 10 spheres, represents the primordial image of humankind, or like the primordial, they call it Adam Kadmon, like the original Adam. And that we're made in the image of God in the sense that we participate in these qualities of God, and they're sometimes equated to like the divine names, or platonic forms and things like this. And in this system, there's different triads of these 10 spheres, and from Keter it emanates Hakma, which is like kind of like how do I describe it? It's like the in the sense of like the mind of God or something. It's like the blueprint of all that's going to come. And then Binah is like a particularization. Is the next one that comes. Binah is the particularization of the wisdom of God, or something like that. Like Hakman is called wisdom. Anyway, it's kind of like expansion and contraction. It's kind of like 1 and 8 in a certain way. These kind of primordial energies, and underneath, like then it emanates down, and there's like the heart, and they represent different parts of the body too, and stuff like this. Anyway, there's this sphere called Dot or Doth, and it's kind of like an 11th hidden sphere. And one translation of Dot means knowledge, and it's also seen as the external aspect of Keter, that unknowable source, kind of the 9 out there. And like in this, I'm reading this book that I recommend to anybody really nerdy. It's called Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition, which is just like blowing my mind. But it talks about Dot or Doth, and it says that let's see. According to Sholem, who's this Kabbalistic scholar, Dot is supposed to represent the external aspect of Keter, which is directly above, which Keter is directly above Dot on the Tree of Life. What could this mean? Keter, we have seen, is a will or a drive that is constituted by the tension of the nothing and unity, or indeterminacy and determinacy. Dot is sometimes referred to as the temporal present, and Keter, which is above it, as the eternal now. I want to suggest that Dot is time itself, conceived in opposition to Keter's eternal now, which is, of course, outside of time. Dot is called knowledge because it represents the contact point of the Kabbalist with the Sephiroth. Our knowledge of God and the cosmos is a unity of wisdom, Hakman, and understanding, Binah, a knowledge of wisdom through understanding. We know that the eternal is a sensuous way, and our knowledge is in time. Significantly, Dot is also sometimes referred to as Holy Spirit. So, Dot is kind of time. It's this entry point. And what's interesting is that this point between, where the 1-7 and 8-2 lines crisscross is on the hexad, and the hexad in particular represents the law of 7, which represents time and process. And so there's something about it being underneath 9, the eternal now, that it's like it is like I think it represents time and the access point where these eternal ideas of God or these moments of God are able to express themselves within a process. And it's not that 4-5 is time as the antithesis of unity. It's just the absence. And so it's like the tension between the unity and the nothing is time.
Well, and that recalls, if this is comes back to the sundial is reflecting time.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And then the other thing too, you mentioned, what was it, expansion, and what was the other? What's the opposite? Is it contraction?
Contraction.
Or what is it? So one of the other riffs on this reflections idea is that 3 is take away 9, right? 9 is everything
Gladly.
and nothing. Right, exactly. So
Let's get rid of it.
Wow.
3, so 3 is reflecting towards 7 and 8. That's expansion. Those are the two biggest numbers if you take away 9, right? And then 6 is the contraction. It's going back, reflecting back towards 1 and 2, the smallest numbers.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Egyptian mythology, the Ennead of Heliopolis, there's the androgynous Atum Ra, who represents 9, and he wakes up from the primordial void of Nun, which is, the unmanifest, transcendent nothing. And
Where we get the word none, probably.
None, exactly, right.
Oh.
And he wakes up and he masturbates, and because that's what 9s do.
Yeah,
because they just
every day.
They're cozy. They wake up. It's like
Beat off.
and then he produces. He's androgynous. He's a they them.
Yeah,
They them produces Shu
That's
and
his preferred pronouns. Yeah.
preferred pronouns.
Oh, Miss Jen.
Shu and Tefnut, and they represent expansion and contraction. And actually, like Atlas, who holds up the world, is modeled on Shu, and he's holding up the sky. So he's expansion and separate, and the expansion of space and time. And Tefnut, she's an aspect of the goddess Sekhmet, but it's like contraction. And they represent like the whole, like the sense of space itself, right? Those two together, they're twins coupled. They represent just those principles of contraction, expansion, not just in time, or not just in space, but also in time. Like all those principles of thingness are represented by them. So that's pretty cool.
One other riff too is just the classic, what, I don't know what you call it, axiom or whatever, as above, so below,
Right.
is also in the fact that 9 with 4 and 5 equal 9, right? So as compared to those other ones where they change numbers,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Right.
So, okay, to sort of like bring it home, what is the hexagram triangle saying about humanity? I think one thing that I think something you said, John, is that if you can say that 369 is a sort of like a circular, it's all meant to sort of keep the ball rolling, and everything feeds into each other. But 4, 5, 7, 8, 1, 2 represent ways that those types are taking superego, withdrawal, and assertiveness, and pushing away from this circular human thing that's going on at 369. And so it's this counter force where 369 by itself would just be the circle that doesn't have any, it needs this counter force to have to have these shifts, because these types are kind of like contra versus synflow. Actually, that's a really good concept to explain what's happening. It's like contra, synflow represents this sort of communal. Synflow, for those of you who don't understand, is like the stacking self-pres, social, sexual, and sexual self-pres. And this is David's concept that synflow, those stackings have a communal flowing into each other. There's a sense of cooperation that even with sexual self-pres, that with those stackings, whereas the self-pres, sexual, social, and social self-pres stackings have a way that they're creating distance away from their dominant instinct And so there's a contrast between those two groupings of stacking. And so you might explain this hexagram triangle or the hexad types as forming the contraflow types in the Enneagram, and to produce that sort of a hexad force, like you could have attachment types, but you need like a hexad in the mix to sort of change things up, to sort of like go against the circle of humanity.
Right.
Well, practically, who the fuck knows? But in the more interesting way, like, so there's a line I think in True Detective where Rust, I think, says, "Death created time so it could grow the things it could kill," and that always just stuck with me because this contraction versus expansion, this this whole principle is like, the inhale, the exhale of time. Like, I think I can't remember where this comes from, if it's Gurdjieff or somebody else or what, but it's that time is breath, right? And like, especially within the Gurdjieffian stuff, like the time has got a special, it's called the merciless hero pass. And it's this like degrading force that we have to work against, force of atrophy. And so anyway, it's like a hermetic principle, and I'm hyped up on this stuff because I've been studying it lately, but it's sort of always there anyway, is that human beings, like, in a sense, complete God. Like, that God has to come to know itself through the organs of human consciousness, right? And that you need something like a separation to, like when we're identified with something in terms of just like inner work, we need to separate from it. Like, we need to know our Enneagram types so that we can see the type in action, so we don't just be the type, that we are seeing it and present with it and knowing it. And that's the only way we can know it, is by distinguishing something. So this counter force, this negative force, in a sense, it's like in the Gurdjieff, where we say like the holy negative force, right? Like the holy negation force. Like it's given this sense of being holy because the negative force, no matter what it is in our direct experience, like right now, there's a presence of the negative force. That is what gives us the separation that allows us to come into the reconciling force, the reconstituting force. And that all like Greek, Hermetic, Egyptian ideas were this sense that some kind of separation is necessary, because the coming back together produces a new something. And like, I have this tattoo that I tattooed on myself that comes from, I kind of hate Aleister Crowley, but he wrote the book, he channeled the Book of the Law, and I just like, this line has always just stuck with me, which is, "I am divided for love's sake, for the chance of union." It's the same principle of this division that leads to a unity instead of a formless fog or something like that. Is it making sense?
Yeah. All right. So let's. Well, did you have something?
No.
Okay. I was just gonna say, just to humanize this a little bit for people who've been completely lost. Nancy and Alexandra, talk about your impressions of the opposite hexad zone. Alexandra's a 9. Talk about 5, 4, 5. Now that you're with the 4, 5, and Nancy, I want to hear your impression of assertive types like 7 and 8, or that
Talk
space.
about how good it is.
Yeah, what's your impression as a 3 of the opposite energy?
Nancy, you go first.
Do I start? No, I don't want to start.
You're making me look bad.
Well, it's just kind of a large question.
Well, what's your impression of 7s and 8s? You don't have to. It doesn't need to get to conceptual. Just in general, like as a 3, as an assertive type. Like how do you? What's your experience of the assertiveness of 7 and 8, and how does that feel? Similar and oppositional to the way that you operate as an assertive type.
I got lost in John's.
Everybody's lost in John's.
Lost in the sauce of John.
Is your question, Emeka, like just how do I
Just to get
relate to 4
not-
and 5?
just your impression of the opposite nature of that space of
Of
4
the
or
dyad
5.
of 4 or 5
Yeah.
versus 9.
Just trying to get this thing bring this down to earth, get some humans talking about, relatable shit to wrap this
Sure.
episode up.
Emeka's like, make this stop.
No, I mean, I'm just realizing, like, holy shit, like nobody's gonna follow this at all.
I mean, I'm barely
Well-
following it.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said about the fact that it is these like sort of long triangles that people usually mistype themselves as.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like 9s are always mistyping themselves as 5s or as 4s,
That's
and I was one
interesting,
of
yeah.
them. And we do see like 6s, they're, usually going for 4s and whatever else, but they still mistype a lot as 1 and 2. And 3 definitely confuses itself for 8 and 7.
Yep.
So I have always kind of seen, as somebody that mistyped as a 5 in the beginning, I always saw myself obviously in the withdrawn sense, but in the like really unavailable sense of 5, or at least like what I understood 5 to be at the time.
Right.
I related to being unavailable, to not wanting anything to do with anything or anyone. So there's some 4 that comes in with that too. And so I this is maybe separate but related, but I also have like a 5 wing on my 6 fix and a 4 wing on my 3 fix. So I have all the withdrawn types, and I've kind of seen it as like I kind of, in a light, distant way, I am familiar with that bottom space. I am familiar with like the pit of existence and humanity. But being a 9, it's just kind of like there's nothing I can do about it anyway, so let's just deal with it. Like let's just kind of float along with it. What are you going to do? I think a lot of 9s, despite being a positive outlook type, can have the same sort of futility and hopelessness that can exist in 4 and 5. It obviously doesn't own it as much.
Right.
Because it prefers to be in a diffused state, and obviously like it is holding the rest of the Enneagram. But I don't know, that's been my relationship to 4 and 5, like not just the obvious things of being withdrawn, but I actually do think that 9 has a way of carrying all the pain and all the suffering and all the like misery of the world, and being able to be detached but participating at the same time.
I mean, 9 is definitely separating in its own fashion.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And even just being with a 4 with a 5 wing, so John's in that space where like we make up that little triangle ourselves. There are obvious overlaps with the both of us. Like there's an obvious impulse to pull away from things, to feel like our energy is being stolen from us or taken from us without will. It's obviously going to be more, I don't know, I'm going to be more sensitive to it because I'm a 9 and because I have social, so I just have more antennas out for that. But there still is that kind of recoil that I have that is very obvious in 4 and 5. It's just way more subtle for me. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, that's great. That was
something coming to me about this, because like what can we like practically use in a certain way? And it's like it's kind of faint right now, but it's sort of like we're both separating, right? But Alexandra needs to separate. Like, so as a 4 with a 5, I actually need to get into that universal space more. And maybe it's not anti-separation, but there's something there that's like counters that like I'm trying to push off from things, because like when I separate, it's like a default of just being disconnected and then needing to go by myself. Whereas Alexander's separation, there's still like a channel to the everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I separate because there's nothing left. There's no like space left to absorb, so I have to. or else I'm just, it's like the sponge is totally full. So I have to go because I'm useless now. I'm completely full. There's nothing else anyone can do with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something in there. I'm kind of not quite getting it, but there's something about how our separation can be almost, the sponge thing. Like, part of it is that nines have a hard time holding on to their individuality, so they start absorbing from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something energetic in this also, in that like 4 and 5 maintains its energetic separation.
Right. Yes.
Whereas 9 like secretly is separating, but the energy still remains very open. So what I can take from the 4-5 space is energetically separating also, in order to like keep my participation actually, or like lengthen it or preserve it or whatever.
There we go. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My experience of 3, just I've been jazzed up on like some 3 documentaries, just seeing like, oh, this magic of an assertive type who's tapped into the heart of the collective, and they're just to see the style of attachment where the 3 is pushing out and has a singular identity, but the singular identity is tapping into something that the collective is channeling, an identity the collective can attach to. And the 8 thing is sort of like, well, I'm going to reality distort and create the thing that I want. And it's very egoic and it's very, forceful. I'm going to make reality into what I want it to be. And 3 is like, I'm going to push out there, but what I'm doing is in conversation with some deep identity that everyone can tap into. And so it just feels very collective. It feels very tapped into, what it means to be human, versus 7 and 8, which is, very seemingly narcissistic, like egoic types that I get what I want. And it doesn't matter what's going on. I'm going to try to get what I want. So I just wonder what the 3 perspective on the, Nancy, you got anything?
Well, so a couple things that Alexandra said spurred my brain, and then they left. But I think some of the 3s definitely mistype as 7s a lot, and I have been told by many people that they think I'm a 7 or an 8.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, when I'm angry, a lot of people think I'm an 8, which I'm like, 8s aren't just anger, but interesting take. So I think we share a lot of that forward momentum kind of energy, but I often feel like 7s are too flippant with it, and that 8s aren't flippant enough with it.
What does that mean?
It means like they don't have enough fun with it. So it feels like I am the point of the triangle where like that kind of combines. Like that kind of freedom of the 7 to have a little bit of fun, and that energy of the 8 to kind of drive through kind of combines into 3ness a little bit.
Yeah.
But I definitely experience it differently than like I think a 3-wing 2 would, because I think I have a lot of like pessimism from that 4-wing.
Right.
It kind of keeps me from like relating to that 7 space.
Yeah. No, that's interesting.
I'll say something that I see with 3 versus 7 and 8 is that I actually, and maybe I'm biased or something, but actually 3s are probably more effective with their assertive energy because they are working with the obstacles versus just trying to like plow through them. Like they spend a lot less time actually being in resistance to something because they're able to work with their obstacles.
Yes.
Right. But I will say, I think it's important to sit in that space of feeling the resistance because there have been like a lot of instances in my life where I like look back and think that I probably could have sat in that space longer to process what happened. If that makes sense. So like so I feel like that assertive energy can kind of blow you past a lot of the different parts of life, and I guess that's where like 3's emotions coming out at bad times is probably something that happens.
Yeah, that's all really interesting stuff. I think people are going to be wanting more stuff on specific type wings, and we can get to that in the next episodes. But like, we just had to.
We're going even more abstract next time.
Yeah, we just had to get this abstract fucking
Perfect.
riff out of the system, just so we can move on to the more wings.
I'll
but
have
yeah,
even less to say then.
Well, I'm looking at the Enneagram again, and there's just like so much that keeps popping out. Like, so 4 and 5 also being on the bottom, these are the only two that don't have their lines going in like a wide.
yeah,
They're not,
Yeah.
they're both like stuck on their own side.
right.
Like 4
They're the-
only goes to super ego types, and they're on the right side. 5 only goes to assertive types, and they're on the left side. There's something there. And then like 1 and 8 only go to their own object relation types. Like 1
Yeah.
stays frustrated
Right.
either way, and 8 stays rejecting. There's like, I don't know, there's something there. Like
Something
2
there, yeah.
goes to reactive,
Oh, yeah.
only to reactive types, and 7 only goes to competency types.
Well, and you could say all the gut types, if you drew a triangle out of them, because there's not naturally, besides 9, right? There's with 8 and
Mhm.
1, they all make equilateral triangles.
Mhm.
And that's like that's the most firm, immovable triangle, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that explains something about gut energy and its immovability and its stubbornness.
Mm.
Yeah. And I've got an article speaking to what you're talking about, Alexandra, on my site about just the narrowness of the 4 and 5 points. Those are the 2 sharpest angles, and
Mhm.
they take up the least space if you made a
Yeah.
triangle out of each of them. And that's, of course, symbolic of their separation and
Trying to wedge
And-
ourselves out of existence.
yeah, and the distilling quality of them. They're
Yeah,
sharpening,
totally.
tapering into more and more specificity.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, that brings me even back to something else that I relate to about 4 and 5. Is like, again, I know that I have 4 and 5 as like part of my overlay, but even that specificity is something that like I actually do relate to when I can find it.
Mhm.
And I don't think
Yes.
it's just a one wing thing.
Right.
They're actually like, I don't know. It's almost like because I'm taking in everything all the time, that I can get like, it's like one small thing can set off a trail of other things. But like, I don't know, I'm losing my train of thought, but there is something about like the narrowness and the specificity of
Mhm.
4 and 5 that I've always been able to access and pick up on, despite also being super open and diffused as a
Mhm.
9.
Here's another thing, if talking about angles and in the abstract world. If you look at 2 and 7, those are the most wide open angles,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And that represents sort of the bigness of personality that they represent.
They both have wide open mouths. Like
Yes.
Yeah.
7 wants to taste everything, and then
looks like
2 wants
legs
to
to me.
kiss you and
Yeah, I was
suckle
gonna say
you
it's
and-
wide open legs.
Those look like wide open legs.
Yeah.
Please make love to me. Please, dear God, make love to me.
It's an X pattern right there where we're at the center. You know what that means.
Oh yeah.
Triple
Happy
X.
Pride Month.
Anyway, we've been going for an hour.
All right.
Yeah.
Anybody? Anything
At
else?
least we left it on fucking.
Yes.
The most
We
important.
sort of started it on fucking, and we left it on fucking.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, we started it with Josh pegging me.
Pegging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even this whole thing of the 2 triangles, the hexagram, time and form and space, and emptiness and form. It's all
There you go.
sex.
Yeah.
It is.
It's all
It's all
sex.
sex.
It's
Everything's
all
sex.
How does the Big Bang happen?
interpenetration.
Interpenetration.
The helix.
What did you say, Nancy?
Oh, I said, how did the Big Bang happen? Banging.
There you go.
All sex.
That's it. The really big bang.
You get it? You get it?
Do you get it? Do you want me to explain it to you?
All right. I'm socialed out, so
Yeah.
All right.
talk to y'all later.
Yeah.
See y'all later. This should be a
Bye.
fun one. Let's see who
Yeah.
follows it.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.